It's 9 o'clock, East Coast. Zhixiong, are you ready?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening. Welcome you again to this World River and Delta System Source to Sink series and webinar series. So today we invite Professor Zhixiong Shen from Coastal Carolina University come here talk about Lower Mississippi River, the source to sink carbon pathway, and the implication for global carbon cycle. Before I introduce Zhixiong, as always, and our future talk, the next month in July, there's no talk scheduled. So I guess I also need a break. So no talk next month. But when we return August, we, as you can see, we have already a bunch of very good talks or speakers already lined up here. For example, as you can see here, John Anderson from Rice University talk about the delta on the Texas continental shelf, and Xiao Hua from Australia, and Chris Hackney talk about the Mekong, Lviv from Woods Hole talk about the Daniel River, and you can downright, you know, the former director from WIMS, he will also talk about anthropogenic impact on the Delta, and a whole bunch of good talks. So once again, the fourth semester, we will keep this series going, going forward. If you have a colleague, or if you including yourself, if you want to volunteer, give a talk, let me know. If you have postdoc, if you have somebody think will contribute, make this webinar series better, please recommend them to me. So I will try to host them, and maybe we'll increase also Friday, but let's see. And also in the past, as you can see, last year we have 35 talks in 2020. This year so far we have 41. Now is 76 talks, and already archived very well on the YouTube channel. So feel free to use it for the research and teaching education purpose. And at the same time, you know, if you want to keep update informed, please following our Twitter account, Source to Sink. As you can see, apart, you know, the talk, the flyer of Zhixiong's talk over there. And so let's be hook up together during this very difficult time. And Zhixiong, as I mentioned, from Coastal Carolina University, currently he is associate professor there, and he graduated originally from Peking University Department of Geography, and then PhD from University of Liverpool, and then postdoc at Tulane and research assistant at Tulane University, working with our colleague, friend Tor there. His research is focused on coastal geomorphology, geology, river delta, and and quaternary environmental change, and also including geochronology. Use the kind of this the method, and so okay, I will stop here and give the floor to Zhixiong. Zhixiong, please go ahead and share your screen. And so
okay, let me just start with this. Hey, thank you very much, Paul, for the wonderful introduction and for inviting me to this wonderful series. Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. I can see people from all over the continents, different continents in the audience here. So it's a great pleasure to be able to come here and talk about our latest research that was just came out in March on the journal AGU Advances. And the topic we want to talk about is really to talk about how anthropogenic changes, in particular engineering of rivers, can potentially changing the function of rivers to connect the terrestrial carbon reservoir and the marine carbon reservoir, basically how carbon has been transported through river system. And first of all, I want to thank NSF for supporting this project. And this was started in 2011, if I remember correctly. And also thanks for all my collaborators for multiple years of support and collaboration, which makes this work possible. Okay, so this is a figure. Well, we are probably most of us are quite familiar with different versions of this figure. Basically, illustrating the carbon cycling, global carbon cycling in a long geological time scale. What are the major processes withdraw carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and also what are the major sources of carbon to the atmosphere? And well, let me get my laser out here. Okay, good. Okay, so from the point of view of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the land to ocean connection, two processes here are pivotal in terms of controlling carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. One is the classical weathering of silicates that basically remove carbon from the atmosphere and then eventually deposit them in the form of carbonates in the ocean marine sediments. The other very important process in terms of removing carbon dioxide is actually transport of organic materials from the continents and then eventually buried in marine sediments. And this forms a long-term geological sink of carbon. And that also the other three major sources of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere from a geological perspective. Okay, and so the focus of the talk today is really to focus on the sink associated with transporting organic materials from the continents to the oceans, but at a time scale that is much shorter than generally kind of illustrated in this geological time scale question. So look at the relevance of these processes in terms of global carbon cycle. I'm just going to use this figure from back in 2009 that has been I have been using this many times to illustrate the numbers that are attached to the carbon cycling processes. And these numbers all have a unit of million tons of carbon per year or billion grams of carbon per year. Either unit is okay. And the red numbers representing the net change of carbon in each of these reservoirs, while these black numbers representing flux, basically. And I want to highlight here, well, I mean, there are a number of other numbers that some of you are probably familiar with, and I'm not going to focus a lot on those numbers. But what I want you to, our focus here is that the transport of organic carbon, of carbon, not necessarily organic carbon at this moment yet, carbon from land to ocean through river systems, and also the incorporation of inland water bodies in this process. And so annually, currently estimated is roughly about 1 million tons of carbon that is being transported through rivers to the oceans. About half of that is organic, and then the other half is inorganic. And well, there has been a lot of recent studies try to quantify the impact of inland water bodies in the process of carbon transport from land to ocean. And few studies have focused, or few studies have been done to work out the role of floodplains, in particular the role of floodplains in this process here. And in terms of the organic matter that has been transported from land to oceans, we have long recognized that the organic carbon actually consists of often consists of extremely old materials. So when you measure the age, the radiocarbon age of the organic matter, it is for already long recognized that those organic matter is not produced contemporaneously, and sometimes they can have an age up to a few thousand years or even indefinitely older age. So this is quite nicely summarized in this review paper by Blair and Allen in 2012, where you have rivers transport a lot of materials to the oceans, and most of those are going to be the silicates, and then a small proportion of that will be organic matter. In terms of organic matter, if you imagine the age of different organic matter in the sediments carried by the river, you often sometimes get some modern age material, and then you also get kind of aged but still datable by radiocarbon method. So it's younger than a few tens of thousands of years. And these are often called as soil organic matter. And then you also have the corrosion. Those are organic matter that is not going to be dissolved in most of our dissolved agents in the lab. And then the oxides that is being carried along with all this organic matter that can be can oxidize basically, or oxidize this organic material. And well, the age differences between the different components of the organic matter actually is a reflection of where this organic material comes from. Or of course, the modern age organic material comes from contemporary photosynthesis that were produced recently, or just produced very recently. While the aged organic material is often primarily derived from erosion of soil organic material, and so they have been buried in the soils for some time and then being eroded, and then the corrosion is often interpreted as derived from bedrocks in the catchment, primarily sedimentary rocks and metamorphic rocks exist. And so because the different ages obviously is indicative of different sources of organic carbon, and also different processes potentially involved in transport of this organic material. So as a result, the ages of organic materials carried by the river carries some meaningful implication regarding the processes involved in carbon transport in the river. And in the same paper by Blair and Aller, this processes of river transport organic material from land to ocean has been summarized very nicely to kind of two end-member situations, which is being termed as passive margin rivers, so processes associated with passive margin rivers and active margin rivers. The major difference between these two types of rivers is that how fast these organic materials can be transported to the ocean. And for active margins, because those rivers often drains high mountainous regions close to the ocean, so the rivers have very little floodplain space, and flooding pulses often transport sediments rapidly to ocean and even to the deeper part of the ocean. So organic materials are transported to the ocean without much modification during the process of transport. As a result, when you have modern aged organic material and corrosion in the sediments, they are going to be transported largely intact to the oceans, and then marine source organic materials being added to the process. The contrast here is for passive margin rivers, those large rivers often carry extremely large floodplains. The migration of those large rivers along its floodplains result in multiple cycles of erosion and deposition of the sediments and the organic materials in the floodplain. So the floodplain acts as a kind of major buffer to the transport of both sediments and organic material to the ocean. And during this process, the organic material is going to be modified. And first, the corrosion source organic material may gradually be weared out or oxidized. And then, while the sediments were stored in the floodplains getting aged, those modern aged organic material getting aged, and then gradually you lose the modern terrestrial carbon, and then getting more and more aged terrestrial carbon. Eventually, this add into the ocean, and on the shallow continental shelf, a large part of this organic material will eventually be oxidized and not preserved, and then you also have the marine source being added too. And so this figure here very nicely kind of contrasts the two end member situations regarding the role of rivers transport organic materials from land and ocean. And if we focus on these large rivers, some study has looked at how much organic material will be lost actually through these processes of transport. Generally, for large rivers, seems to be at least 50% of the organic carbon transported through this river system will be lost. And so it's a huge amount of organic material that has been lost, and then will be carbon dioxide outgassing to the atmosphere. And the recent study, very interesting, published by Shen in 2019, the journal Geology, did a study specifically kind of simulated sediment transport processes over a distance of more than 1,000 kilometers, and then measure the amount of organic carbon loss during the transport process. What he found is very interesting, which is that even up to 1,000 kilometers of continuous transport of organic material in the lab, they only detected about less than 10% of loss of organic matter. So the inference here is that about at least 40% of the organic carbon that was lost during the transport is associated with this erosion depositional cycle. In another word, associated with the organic matter that is being stored in the floodplain. And so this is a very interesting idea and a very interesting finding. And actually this finding is kind of echoing with the idea that we initiated with this research, which is looking at how these large Pacific margin rivers the role has been changed in terms of transporting organic material in the Anthropocene. And we know rivers has been heavily managed worldwide, and the Mississippi River is a very, very good example for this. So for those who may not be familiar with where is the Mississippi River, so here is the continental US, and the kind of gray shaded region representing the catchment of the Mississippi River with its distributaries and tributaries, sorry. And then this black box here highlights the area that is being enlarged. That's the part of the lower Mississippi River. So the Mississippi River beneath Cairo in Illinois is all called the lower Mississippi River here, okay? So this is a lower Mississippi River, and the gray shaded region representing the uplands bounding the lower Mississippi River Valley. This valley was formed primarily during the last, after sea level fall, after about 80,000 years, according to our previous study. And the valley is up to about 100 kilometers in width, in the maximum, in the place where you see the maximum width. And the river is running through this floodplain valley. And since about 10 to 11,000 years, the river changed form, braided form during the glacial times to a meandering form that we see during the Holocene. And then during this Holocene, the river has been avulsed many times, migrating laterally and also aggregating vertically, accumulated massive amount of sediments within this valley. But the river has been dramatically modified by engineering activities. Not only just the river, but also the catchment feeding the river has been modified dramatically within the last 2 to 3 centuries. Well, first of all, if you look at this figure here, if you may identify these red lines, these are all artificial levees, buildings surrounding the river, starting as early as early 1700s, starting from near New Orleans. And over the last more than 2 centuries, almost the entire lower Mississippi River has been protected by levees. And in some locations, the levees almost just sit directly by the river. In some other locations, the levees give the river a little bit of distance for migrating. So the river is essentially being locked in place by the levees, and also a lot of additional engineering designs, like, for example, the building of groins. So those are kind of artificial levees that is building perpendicular to the river to basically constrain the flow of the river to the center part, and also artificial cutoff to straighten the river, and also bank revetments, basically adding protection on the side of the levee that is facing the river to prevent the erosion, basically. So all these measures very effectively, as you're going to see later, prevented the migration of the Mississippi River. And in the area on top of that is also the changes occurred in the catchment, including, for example, the change of clearance of regional natural vegetation, including both grassland and forest for agriculture purpose. So starting from the horizontal scale here is log. So just get you got a little sense. So starting from the early 1800s, the amount of cultivated area in the Mississippi basin has dramatically expanded, declined a little bit in the middle of the 19th century, 20th century, but it remains a pretty high proportion. And also, obviously, there has been a lot of development of urbanizations and other kind of management in the tributaries, and also building of massive amount of dams in the catchment. That all has been dramatically affected the river and potentially the role of this river in transporting carbon to the ocean. And this kind of engineering modification of rivers is not just unique to the Mississippi River, and it's actually pretty widespread in the world. And in Europe, in Asia, those large rivers like the Yangtze and the Yellow River or the Rhine-Meuse River, all these rivers has been heavily managed. So as a result, the kind of impact this management have on rivers may carry some significant implication to the global carbon cycle. So the research here is really trying to answer these two questions. First, how did this river management, in particular the embankment of the rivers, has changed the quantity and quantity of organic material that has been transported by these large mass passive margin rivers? And because as you would imagine that it will stop those exchange of material between the river and the floodplain, and then how does this carries an implication to the global carbon cycle? And the specific objectives of this research is really to use the Mississippi River as an example to investigate the change in the composition and the pathways of organic carbon during the last about 1,000 years. And then hopefully we can do some quantification regarding the quality of the OCE discharge carried by the lower Mississippi River. And so to carry out this research, we used, there has been publications about the organic carbon, the composition of the carbon for the modern lower Mississippi River. And those involve samples that have been collected during flooding stage of the river at multiple locations, represented by this green triangle, and also this red kind of triangle as well. And the issue is to get get information about the organic carbon carried by the river before modern days, before the anthropogenic modifications. So we went to the sediments that has been deposited by the Mississippi River. There has been a recent study published, study of organic carbon in sediments deposited in Oxbow Lakes that was formed within the last 100 years in the middle part of the Mississippi River. And beyond that, this is still within the time frame of a major anthropogenic change. So beyond that, we want to go get some sediments, get some information about the organic carbon of the river beyond the Anthropocene. So we come to the Mississippi River Delta, looking at deltic sediments at multiple sites where we have some controls regarding the age of the sediments already. So we look at one crevasse play here, which is right over this location. This representing a former Mississippi River course, which is called Bayou Lafourche. And we have a crevasse play. We have samples been taken, and we have a very detailed geological study of this crevasse play. And then we carried, we took a few samples for this study here, and also looking at a kind of bayhead delta or crevasse play, whatever you call it, in the modern, close to the modern mouth of the Mississippi River here. And so the idea here is that, well, the organic carbon associated with these sediments representing the carbon that, or approximately represent the carbon of the Mississippi River when the sediments were deposited. So we need to figure out the age of the sediments, which is done through OSO dating. I'm going to give you a very short introduction of that. And also to understand the composition of the organic carbon, we investigated the age of the organic material. As we have introduced earlier, river organic carbon consists of components, carries various different ages. And here we not only just investigated the bulk age, but also looking at the age spectrum of the organic carbon using the rapid pyrolysis oxidation method, or RPO method. And then for samples, we do paired dating measurement for samples we have. So we carry both carbon-14 dating and OSO dating for the samples. The OSO dating gave you the age of deposition for the sediments, while the carbon dating gave you the age information about the organic material. So the difference between these two gave you the age about the organic matter that is being transported by the Mississippi River when the sediments were deposited. Okay, so a very brief introduction about these two methods for those who may not be familiar with. So the RPO method here is that you have your organic material that is being loaded on this aliquot within this pyrolysis chamber, where temperature is going to gradually increase linearly, and then this chamber is oxygen without oxygen. So with increasing of temperature, the organic matter will be pyrolyzed, and then that pyrolyzed organic material will gradually be exported to this combustion chamber where oxygen is being supplied, and then organic material is going carbon basically is going to be converted into carbon dioxide and then being collected. And with increasing temperature, more labile or more active organic material will be pyrolyzed first, and then more stable organic matter will be pyrolyzed later. And as a result, you will see an evolution of carbon out of this combustion pyrolyzing process. So the black curve here is evolution curve, shows how much carbon dioxide has been produced with the pyrolysis pyrolyzing. Okay, and there will be a peak temperature where you see the maximum amount of production of carbon dioxide, and this is a measure of the overall stability of the organic material. And then the samples collected at a different pyrolysis temperature interval can be used to measure its carbon-14 age, and you will often get the youngest age at the lowest temperature and then oldest age for the highest temperature. So you get a spectrum of the age for the organic material here. Okay, and for OSO dating, most of you should be quite familiar, probably are quite familiar with this already. I'm so going to go through this very briefly as well. And so this is a kind of band energy model for materials. For you can think about atom or mineral. And in a kind of ideal situations, electrons are all located in this valency band. But under radiation from natural environment, electrons can be evicted, can receive energy, get excited, ionized to get into the conduction band, and left with holes for those electrons. And then those electrons in the conduction band are not stable. They will try to come back to the valency band. On the way, they can get trapped within imperfections within the crystal. Similarly, the holes can be trapped as well. And then this energy keep on accumulating until some processes can evict the electrons out of the traps, and then those electrons will still come back to the valency band. Some of them will have a chance to matter with the holes, and then this is called recombination, produce light, and this light are called luminescence. And if this eviction process is associated with light stimulation, then this is called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSO. Okay, and so the basic idea is that while in sediments is always going to be exposed to natural radiation, so keep on accumulating these trapped charges. And then when the sediments are transported, if they had a chance to be exposed to sunlight, that the light sensitive component of the trapped charges will be emptied. And then the sediments are deposited and buried in the delta, for example, and then they again begin to accumulate this trapped charge populations until we release it in the lab and then measure the intensity of the signal. And that gives us a sense of how much energy has been accumulated since the last deposition. And that can be used to estimate the age of the sediment. So those are the massive. This is the massive part of the of this work. And next, I'm going to present you some results with our explanation. Well, first, this is just one example of the RPO data for one of our examples. We have collected 5 subsamples from this material at a different temperature interval. And again, the black curve is representing the evolution of carbon dioxide during the pyrolysis process. And this black boxes, the bar graphs representing the age of the carbon-14 age of each of the components that we collected at a progressively high temperature. And this is the maximum temperature associated with the evolution of carbon dioxide. And the bottom here shows the bulk delta 13 C13 value. This is very typical of sediments that you found in the Mississippi River. And the top here shows the OSO age of the sediments that we use to produce this graph. This measures the age using quartz, okay? And this measures the age using the organic material within that example, okay? And so the OSO age for this sample is about 1,190 years, while the carbon-14 age, bulk age, is about almost 10,000 years. While we have different components, we have a relatively young component here, we have a relatively older component here. And we put all our samples together, and also the sample taken from the Oxbow lakes that I mentioned earlier. Well, you see the evolution curve of these samples are all very, very similar. The peak position of the evolution curve is almost identical for all the samples, suggesting that irrespective of the age of the samples, that the overall thermal stability of the organic materials in these sediments are quite similar. There is one exception here that's slightly different, but overall they show very, very similar overall shape, suggesting that the thermal stability of the organic material in our samples are quite similar. So next, I'm going to show you the plot of the mean carbon-14 and not the carbon-14 age. Next to the plot is going to be the difference between the carbon-14 age and the OSO age, which we termed as the inherited age, okay, of the organic material, including both the bulk age and also the age of these different 5 subsamples we took. This is, I'm going to call this as my age spectrum, okay? And also I'm going to include in some other samples. I'm going to just going to explain you next. Okay, so here's the plot on the horizontal axis. This is the age of the sediments or time, basically. This is the time frame, and this is about 81,000. So it's about 1,000 years ago. And then this is about 100 years ago. This is about 20 years ago from today. And then this is termed as modern. The green circle and this the green and the red symbols representing the kind of modern Mississippi River sediments that were collected during flooding stage of the river. And this red curve doesn't have that age spectrum, just the bulk age. And these squares represent the sediments coming from the Oxbow lakes. We have 5 Oxbow lake sediments. And then the purple diamond representing bulk carbon-14 age produced from the Mississippi River Delta in another study. They also have OSO age so that we can calculate the inherited age as well. And then these orange dots are circles representing our sample, 4 samples we collected here. And then these open circles representing this age spectrum, while the filled circle representing the mean age. And we can notice some dramatic systematic pattern here overall. Well, first, if you look at the overall width of the spectrum, those all I'll call these samples as prehistoric. Okay, so the prehistoric samples, they carry a very, very wide age spectrum. And while in contrast, the modern river sediments, organic materials, the age spectrum is much, much narrower. And also the age, the mean age clearly decreases. We have a gap here, didn't show us what exactly happened in between, but we can clearly see that there is a decrease in the age overall, in the mean inherited age of the organic carbon. Okay, And also, if you look at the modern example in comparison to the prehistoric examples, the oldest component that exists in this prehistoric example is gone in the modern example. We don't have this oldest component that carries ages of 6, 7, or even up to about 15,000 years. That's gone. And in contrast, the modern example carries a very young component that is about younger than about 1,000 years, that is not in this prehistoric example. Okay, so we found this very interesting pattern here through this RP old carbon 14 dating. We found both the bulk age and the age spectrum has been changed dramatically. So the question is, what happened here? And I'm going to bring a slightly different version of this figure and then compare those with the change that we showed you earlier, the anthropogenic changes we showed you earlier over here, to hope kind of make some explanation regarding what potentially happened here. So we have some major changes that occurred with what happens in the catchment that affects erosion, the type of organic carbon input potentially to the river. We also have a lot of changes that occurred to the lower part of the river that basically lock the river down for flood management purpose, for navigation purpose. And all this can potentially be in the factors that is being playing here. So we're going to look at this one by one. First, let's look at the change of agriculture area in the basin. How potentially that can have affected the sediment load and carbon load of the river, and also the age of the river. So these are excuse me, images taken in the early to the middle 1920s in the Mississippi River basin. These are just the representative examples of the type of erosion you see after, for the first two figures, after major rainfall, the type of real erosion, sheet erosion, and then initiation of galling in the, this is northeast of Missouri, so it's in the Mississippi River basin. And this is one side where galling has been developed already, and this, because of this galling, this land has been converted from cultivated land to a pasture. And so overall, it's pretty well documented, associated with this expansion of agriculture, cultivated land in the basin, dramatic increase in terms of erosion has occurred within the Mississippi River basin. And the question is, to what extent this can affect well, you would expect more sediments being loaded to the river, and also potentially change the type of organic matter that is being carried by the river. And here's another example to document this dramatic increase in terms of sediment production from the catchment. This is looking at a small creek in the Mississippi River basin. This is called the Cook Creek. And looking at basically the sediment budget within this small system from 1853 all the way down to 1993. So during this peak time of agriculture activity without much conservation, sediment production is massive within this system. And most of the sediments is being actually deposited within the small system instead of being exported to the Mississippi River. And after 1930s, 40s, with major soil conservation practice, there's a dramatic reduction in terms of 5 to 6 fold of decrease in terms of sediment production in this small system, the same system here. And then the exported amount, surprisingly, the amount of exported material doesn't seem to change much, okay? So we would expect that you will see an increase in the sediment production associated with the expansion of culture activity, and then a decrease of sediment production and load to the river after the decrease of the conservation of soil practice. And if this change of erosion is going to affect the age spectrum, we would expect to see some patterns that matches with this increase and then decrease in terms of soil production, which is not observed here. And also you would expect, if erosion is such an important source to change the organic carbon, you would expect this kind of gully erosion to bring deep old organic matter to the river, which we didn't see it here. So as a result, we don't think that this erosion is the major cause of the issue here. And the dam construction is well known for intercepting sediments in the rivers. And actually, the sediment load of the Mississippi River, you will probably see different versions of this figure in different places. But overall, the sediment load of the Mississippi River has been reduced from about 400 to 500 million tons per year to about 150 million tons per year today after the 1950s, because of the finishing of several major dams in the Missouri River, the tributary, the major sediment source to the Mississippi River. Okay. And some recent estimates suggest that about 2.3 million tons of carbon per year were deposited behind the dams in the Mississippi River system. And then also about 1.7 to 3.7 million tons of carbon being remineralized every year. There hasn't been, I haven't seen any study that shows that trapping sediments behind the dams will change the age spectrum of the sediments that has been passing through the dams. And the other consequence of dam construction is that the riverbed will be eroded generally immediately downstream of the dams. And that will probably bring some sandy materials, old materials to the river. And then also there has been documentation suggesting the downstream most part of the Mississippi River has been eroding its bed, eroding into mid-Holocene organic rich peat beds. Again, those will bring in some very old organic materials to the river, which is not what we have seen in our data. So as a result, we again don't think that dam construction is a major player here or major cause of the issue here. So what is the cause of the issue? We still have another major factor to be considered here, which is the embankment of the river. So to understand that impact, we look at how fast the Mississippi River has been able to migrate. So this is looking at the migration rate of the Mississippi River between 1877 to 1924 based on two hydrological surveys. And this is looking at the maximum meander-band migration rate. The scale here is up to 150 meters per year, okay? And you can see some variations, but overall, you see maximum migration rates up to 30 to 40 on average, 30 to 40 meters per year for vast majority part of the river. And we also look at the Landsat satellite images between 1970s to 2019 to look at the migration rate of the Mississippi River in the era of embankment. And the scale bar here is 30 meters per year. This is 1/5 of the scale bar here. And this is the frequency distribution of the rates we got. So majority of the rates we got for the modern river is lower than 5 meters per year. And actually the average rate you got is merely about 2 meters per year. So this is almost 1/10 of the rate that was found in the late 19th century to the early 20th century before the major levees are well established. And we can do some simple math regarding the amount of sediments produced from this lateral migration of the river, which is being illustrated in this, highlighted in orange here. So before, I'm kind of just dividing the days to before 1950s to and after 1950s, because that's corresponding to the major reduce of sediment load of the Mississippi River. So for the pre-1950s, we're looking at a sediment flux from the floodplain to the river because of this migration on the order of 1,000 million tons per year. In contrast, the modern river migrating at an average rate of less than 2 meters per year merely generate about 100 million tons of sediments to the river. So this is 90% of reduction in terms of material exchange between the floodplain and the river. And well, if we look compare the sediment produced by the flooding to the sediment load of the river, this is almost twice of the annual sediment load. So suggesting that this floodplain sourced material is a very, very important component of the sediment load being transported to the ocean. And today it's still an important component, but it's much smaller. Simply assume about 1% of all these sediments is organic material. We get about 11 million tons of organic carbon input to the pre-1950 river, while today it's probably about a million tons per year. So it's much, so the role of floodplain in terms of controlling to dispose sediments and organic material to the Mississippi River has been dramatically shifted after the stabilization of the river by all these embankment measures. And if we look at the floodplain itself, as I introduced earlier, the floodplain consists of sediments of last glacial in age and also sediments formed during the entire Holocene. So there is not a shot of sediments contains old organic material. Indeed, actually, there are some radiocarbon dates measured for in this so-called Yazoo Basin, part of the Mississippi River Valley, and the Mississippi River has been evolved in multiple stages here, and these are the bulk carbon-14 ages, different symbols representing different types of sediments, and then this gray bar representing the expected age of this channel belt. And you can see there are plenty of old aged material that can be eroded. So there's no short of aged organic material from the floodplain, and as long as the floodplain can erode into it, we would expect they contribute a very old component of the organic material to the river. And now the river is being cut off by these levees from this older source of organic material. As a result, we lost that older component. So the conclusion we got here is that while the embankment reduced this floodplain flux of sediments and OC to the river, and as a result, cut off this aged floodplain OC source. That is our major cause for the change of the age spectrum that we, both the age and the age spectrum we observed earlier. Well, then the next question here is, so what? How to what extent this affect carbon transport overall? Now, if we still come back to this figure here, and well, if we look at the mean inherited age, and we use this age representing the maximum storage time, average storage time of these materials in the floodplain. So for these prehistoric examples, we can get an age of more than 5,000 years of average storage time. And then for the modern examples, we get an average age that is less than 2,000 years. So we've got less than 2,000 years of storage time. And well, as we said earlier, introduced earlier, storage during the floodplain accounts for majority part of the OC loss, the loss of organic carbon during the transport processes. And well, we would imagine that this change in storage time will have a major impact in terms of the loss of organic carbon in the Mississippi River. And to measure this change in the loss of organic matter, we come to this very simple first order oxidation OC loss associated with storage time, or time that is being the organic matter is being exposed to oxidants. And this doesn't give you a specific details about each of these different components of the organic matter, but it gives you a sense of how the bulk organic material, degradable bulk organic material, will survive with time. And so it's a very simple exponential function. And now we have two time periods. We have the pristine Mississippi River, so the prehistoric Mississippi River. We know the storage time is more than 5,000 years, and we assume that 40% of the loss of this organic material were lost during this storage time. So we can use these numbers to constrain the decay constant here. That's going to give us this constraint. Now we have a modern storage time less than 2,000 years. With this decay constant, we come up with a less than 20% of OC loss occurs during the storage of in the floodplain of the modern river. Okay, and with this change in the amount of OC loss, we can further play with the numbers. So this is a 20% loss in floodplain storage. Remember, we also have this 10% storage during the transit of the river after 10%. So in total, we are probably looking at 30% of loss during the transit of the modern river today. And well, we know that so from some studies, the modern river has an OC load of total about, not an OC load, but an OC load at the river mouth of about 4 million tons per year. And that gives us a total OC load. So that's the total amount of OC. You can understand this as being added to the lower Mississippi River was about 5.7 million tons per year. And well, to get you some sense of whether this is on the target, or this recent study by Taylor Marava actually modeled the impact of dams globally on carbon transport by rivers, and they mentioned, well, yes, Mississippi River has been included in the model, and the model, they showed about 3.3 million tons of particulate organic carbon being buried behind the reservoirs And based on the ratio of this berries and export, I get up with a number of about 4.4 to 6.5 million tons of OC that is being exported downstream to the lower Mississippi River, downstream of the reservoir. So this number is in good agreement actually with what we got here. So we have some confidence in terms of the numbers that is not all way off mark. So now we can further dig into the number. Okay, so the President River, by looking at a 5.7 million tons being total load, 4 million tons being exported to the ocean at the milestone, we get a loss of about 1.7 million tons. Well, as the pristine river, the prehistoric Mississippi River, as we said, is about 50%, probably at least 50% being lost. That will convert to 2.5 million tons of loss during the river. If we don't thinking about the OC that is being affected by dam construction, either trapped behind the dam or oxidized behind the dam. And that means we are looking at a 1.1 million tons of carbon, 1.1 million tons of carbon per year of reduction in the loss of OC, because the river is being embanked, because the river is more effective in just the transport the sediments from the hinterland to the ocean. Okay, this almost is 40% of the loss that is occurred, 40% of this 2.9 million ton value. Okay, so it seems like we are looking at that embanking the river has really produced a dramatic change in terms of how this passive margin rivers function in terms of connecting land and ocean in this carbon transport process. As a result, we kind of developed this model that was proposed by Blair and Ella in that 2012 review paper that kind of highlighting the role of pristine passive margin rivers, how the floodplain affect the carbon transport. You have repeated recycling of sediments, exchange of sediments between the river and the floodplain, and extensive amount of outgassing occurring, extended storage time of sediments. This is the pristine situation, and this is still the same idea, as I said, from that review paper. But with the engineered river, what we are looking at is that the amount of exchange between the river and the floodplain has been dramatically shrunk or cut off. And as a result, the both outgassing and also sediment storage time has been dramatically reduced. And as a result, the outlet of the rivers, the sediment, the samples getting younger and the age spectrum getting narrower. And this also means with this engineered river, we would expect the rivers export more organic material to the ocean. And well, that means we are going to have additional barrier of organic material. This, again, I'm borrowing a lot of figures from this wonderful review paper here. And this is showing you the proportion of organic material that is being preserved versus sediment creation rate, and in different type of settings. And I'm not going to read a lot into this figure here, but the percentage here is 30%, and there's 4 dots here representing 4 major rivers: Amazon, Mississippi River, Flying River, and then the Yangtze River. All of them has a ratio preservation ratio pretty consistent, about 30%. It seems like these large rivers, irrespective of what they are transported to the mouth, what are the conditions on the mouth, they always vary about 30% of organic material. So if that holds for what we are talking about, then we would imagine that this increased export of organic material by the Mississippi River will be transferred to more burial of organic material in the marine sediments. That basically means that we are looking at an additional carbon sink here. Instead of being oxidized, released as carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, we are looking at something that is being buried in the marine sediment. And this is the second to the last slide. I'm a little bit close to a time mark here. So this is a figure I borrowed from the Zhixiong and Schneider 2000 paper, shows the major carbon export in the world. And so the Mississippi River is here. The numbers are slightly different, but still very close to the 4.0 million tons we cited. These are carbon export by these major rivers. And well, obviously, most of the middle latitude rivers has been dramatically, in the Northern Hemisphere, has been dramatically changed by engineering modifications. And well, we would expect that has some similar impact as the Mississippi River does, and would reduce OC loss and then increase OC export and burial in marine sediments. What is more fascinating here is also that like the systems like the Amazon and the Congo River, and then some rivers in the Indo Peninsula, actually they are still not much changed. They are still largely pristine actually, but with reasonable expectation in the future, this can be potentially also be engineered like the Mississippi River and like other rivers in the middle latitude. And they can potentially, they are very large carbon exports. So they have a potential to further change the story about the global carbon cycle here, okay? So the take-home messages I want to get out here is that, well, first, we found that embanking actually of rivers actually changes the pathways of organic carbon in large rivers. The major reason is because of the floodplain process has been cut off. And this expedites OC transport through the river system and reduce OC loss that eventually been translated to increase of OC export to the ocean and then increasing OC burial in the marine sediments that potentially form a sink. And then also interestingly, this also makes this large river systems kind of function similarly probably or close to those active margin rivers by rapidly transporting the OC to the oceans. And the last slide are the references that have been cited here for anyone who may want to get some further reading. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Zhixiong, and thank you very much for this great talk. Let's see now, if you have any question, you can go ahead, unmute yourself, you can ask Zhixiong directly. Christoph.
Yeah. Hi, Paul. Hi, everybody. Just have two questions regarding the C14 content of the organic carbon that you described here. You know, there are two concerns about the mix with the petrogenic carbon. Mm-hmm. So did you take that into account, and how did you take that into account? Because changing a little bit this mix between this dead carbon and the rest of the carbon can also change very much the spreading and of the C14 edges, yeah?
Yes, that's a very, very good question and a very valid question. Well, we didn't specifically look at those petrogenic carbon, but what we can say for quite a sure is that in the modern river, we don't have that old OC pool, older carbon pool in our samples. And so no matter what is happening here is that we have this old carbon pool that is being cut off dramatically. So we didn't specifically, the short answer is that we haven't specifically looked at that petrogenic carbon, but it's whether even if it has been exist in the system, it's been cut off from the modern samples.
Okay, the other part of my question was regarding the in-stream production. So, do you have any clues of changes in this in-stream production regarding again the organic carbon production and export from the
river? I've been looking at two aspects of the story. I've been looking at a literature regarding the in-stream production. There seems to be some contrary. Not necessarily contrary conclusions. Well, first, most of the in-stream production probably occurring during the low water stage when the water is clear. And while the low water stage is not the major process is transporting sediments downstream, while the flooding stage is where most of the material is being transported downstream, while the in-stream production is going to be very, very low because of the high turbidity in the system here. So when you look at the modern samples, you didn't see those were samples collected in the flooding stage. You didn't see much signs of a major contribution of in-stream production. That's one part of the story. And then the other part is obviously for building of reservoirs in the upstream, there will be a lot of in-stream production in the reservoirs, and those will probably contribute to the materials that eventually being released downstream. And I would assume probably many of those were oxidized and lost very rapidly before they even reach the mouth where we are concerned here. So the answer is that probably we are not looking at the in-stream production. Thank you, Chris. Okay, I can see a question in the chat about. Oh.
So, Bob, I saw you unmuted. You have a question?
Yes, I do. And first of all, that was a very nice and very enjoyable talk to hear.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. And my question concerns the reactivity. It's somewhat related to the in situ production question, but what you're showing is that since the age is changing, then the mean reactivity of the material that's delivered to the coastal ocean is also changing to some degree. So do you think that the entire coastal ocean system, the heterotrophic activity associated with decomposition processes is being altered as a result of the more reactive material being delivered?
That is an excellent question, and that's what we would assume initially. But first, there was I haven't decided. I don't have the space to put that study over here. Mid-Allison, they did actually study the decomposition of organic material on the Louisiana continental shelf a couple of years ago, and they look at specifically the last about 100 years, if I remember correctly, based on latitude 10 dating. What they found is that while they do see a reduction of organic carbon export to the shelf because of the sediment inception by the dams, but the decomposition or the rate of remineralization doesn't change much across that boundary, if I remember correctly. And so it seems like that there hasn't been a dramatic change in how fast or in the remineralization of that organic material that is being exported to the shelf. And it's a fascinating question that definitely deserves some further research. But on the other hand, if we look at, I know this is representing a very limited number of data set, but if you look at these 4 large rivers that has been cited here, they all have a pretty consistent preservation ratio of organic carbon. I mean, these rivers, the Amazon is a more kind of a tropical river, Mississippi middle latitude, and they have different ocean conditions in different places. Seems like that. What I would assume that the composition of organic matter exported by this, you can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but these rivers are all somehow different. Some of them maybe carry some more old material, some may carry some more young material. But irrespective of all this potential differences, you see this 30% consistent number, close to 30%. And so this is a fascinating question. I can only draw based on this kind of a line of argument that there hasn't been much change in the preservation ratio.
Well,
I'm very happy to hear if you have slightly different suggestions.
No, I think you're essentially correct in your conclusions. One of the interesting possibilities of a signal of these changes would be in the orthogenic carbonate phases being formed in the sites of deposition in the marine environment, because the relative ratio of the terrestrial carbon versus marine carbon that's contributing to the remineralized CO2 tends to be preserved in the orthogenic carbonate pool. So that there might be trends that would mirror what you're describing that would reflect reactivity. Might be worth looking at in the Mississippi.
Yeah, I think Tor has some Tor has a continuous project that is looking. He has already took some sediments on the shelf that will potentially investigate. Well, actually, I think he will investigate this issue. I think Tor is here. If I'm wrong, please correct me.
Cool.
Correct, Zhixiong. So thanks for this suggestion. We're going to remember that.
Okay, great. John?
Hello. Very, very cool stuff, Zhixiong.
Thank you, John. Nice to see you.
Say again?
Oh, I said nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Yes. Yes. Hopefully in person soon. you show that there's not really a signal of land use change and erosion, and that a lot of that is sequestered proximally. That Coon Creek study, plus a lack of old carbon in the sort of 100-year-old deposits. That's very interesting to me, and sort of is very strong evidence in a question that I've had for a long time. I'd like if you could talk more about any caveats to that. I wonder, the first thing I thought of is the Minnesota River catchment, which is a very large catchment. From what I know of that work, shows a big change in erosion rates and export to the Minnesota River into the Mississippi River with land use change, which might contrast with the Coon Creek. But I guess my question is, am I reading it right that your evidence strongly shows that there is no agricultural-based sediment spike, wash load sediment spike in the lower Mississippi River? Is that correct?
Not exactly. And this is not to infer the sediment discharge to the river. We can't build that link yet. It may kind of lean toward that way. Let's put it that way. But it's not. The link is not there yet, because what we're looking at is the organic material. So obviously, when the sediments are eroded from the catchment, and then there will be certainly some kind of buffering effect before they were exported to the river. And the question is whether the lack of this expected old age from deep erosion potentially will contribute to the organic carbon in the lower Mississippi River. Depends on, first, whether it is just the lack of sediment pulse, or it's just the lack of this old material that has been preferentially further trapped within the catchment. So it's a fascinating question. We also always kind of been puzzled by the lack of data actually to look at that. But that's just part of the knowledge gap here. We can't. And more specifically, I would say that the other part of our data here is that, well, ideally, if we have a data point in this gap, our story will certainly be a better story here and a more convincing story here for sure. But that's part of the nature of our research. So we don't have the data here, and so there's still room here. But we're not inferring that, not necessarily concluding that there is no sediment pulse associated with agriculture activity.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's great. Anybody else? Hey, Zhixiong, I have some question. I'm still learning about this interesting topic. So when you said the terrestrial organic carbon kind of the export, the discharge to the ocean kind of increase, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how about the nutrient? I know you didn't start. So how overall is the nutrient from the river to the ocean is increase or keep same, or what's your evaluation?
My understanding is nutrient, in particular phosphorus and nitrogen input to the oceans has been increased. I can't say too much about that. It's out of my mind. I read something, but I haven't got a deeper impression about that.
Okay, the terrestrial organic carbon increase to the ocean will have any impact to the marine organic carbon generation? No.
Well, let me just make one comment here before we jump into the conclusion quoted that OC exported by the rivers are increased. We haven't talked about the impact of dams. In reality, the dams has probably more profound impact than what this embankment of rivers have been done. And they intercept a huge amount of organic material behind the dams and then remineralize a large proportion of that as well. So it's not the Mississippi River, actually, the total amount of OC exported by the Mississippi River was probably reduced instead of increased overall. If we just consider the impact of embankment, that will cause an increase. And then construction of dams in the catchment actually reduce that. So there's the net effect here is not what we haven't considered that yet, but that's something that can be weighted in.
Okay. Is this organic carbon change have any impact to the pH value?
Good question. I have no clue at all at this moment. Sorry.
Yeah, hopefully, if no matter it's from terrestrial or from marine, if the mineralization, the burning rate, increase, I don't know how much contribute to the, acidification. But anyway, I'm a layman. I have not too much knowledge compared to your guys, but anyway, interesting. Anybody else have a question, comments? And if not, and thank you very much. And as I mentioned again, so in July, we don't have talks, but back to August, August 4th, we will have resume our talk series. So as you can see here, and so please mark your calendar. Hopefully, you will have a great summer, and then I see you in August. Okay.
Thank you
So
very much.
Zhixiong, thank you everybody, Chris, Tor, and Bob, everybody. Thank you very much for your support, and hope you guys have a great summer. And most likely we still cannot meet face to face, but hopefully, I don't know, hopefully the Delta variant is not that, I have no idea. Of course, we talk about Delta. Okay, great.